The gravel crunched under Evelyn Carter's boots as she stepped out of her old pickup truck. The Tennessee sunset painting the sky in hues of fire and regret. At 62, Evelyn had seen her share of hard days, but none stung quite like this one. Her son, Caleb, had called her an hour ago, his voice tight with embarrassment. "Ma, I'm sorry, but Lila says you can't come to the family dinner tonight. She thinks it's best if it's just us." The words had hit like a slap, but Evelyn didn't argue. She never did. Not with Caleb, her only child, who'd always been her anchor in a world that had taken so much. Lila, her daughter-in-law, had never warmed to her. From the moment Caleb brought her home to their small farm town of Willow Creek, Lila's city-bred disdain for country folk was clear. She'd wrinkle her nose at the smell of hay, scoff at the simplicity of Evelyn's home-cooked meals, and roll her eyes at the town's annual barn dance. But banning Evelyn from a family dinner at the Rusty Fork, the local restaurant where folks gathered like kin, that was a new low. Evelyn's heart twisted as she pictured Lila's smug smile, her manicured nails tapping as she declared Evelyn unfit for their table. Still, Evelyn wasn't one to wallow. She grabbed her worn denim jacket, slung it over her shoulders, and drove to the Rusty Fork anyway. Not to beg or fight, but because she'd be damned if she let Lila's cruelty keep her from her own town. The restaurant was a haven, its wooden beams and checkered tablecloths a testament to the community Evelyn had helped build. She'd sit at the bar, order a coffee, and hold her head high. The parking lot was packed. Pickup trucks and dusty sedans lined up like soldiers. As Evelyn approached the entrance, she spotted them through the window, Caleb, Lila, and their two kids, Emma and Nate, seated at a corner booth. Emma's pigtails bounced as she colored a placemat, oblivious to the tension. Caleb's shoulders slumped, his eyes darting nervously. Lila, in a sleek red dress that screamed, "Not from here," was laughing loudly, her voice carrying even through the glass. Evelyn's chest tightened, but she pushed the door open, the bell jingling like a warning. "Evelyn Carter, what are you doing here?" Lila's voice cut through the hum of conversation as Evelyn stepped inside. Heads turned locals who knew Evelyn's quiet strength, who'd shared her pies at church potlucks. Lila stood, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor, her eyes blazing with indignation. "I told Caleb this was a family dinner. You weren't invited." The room fell silent. Evelyn felt the weight of every gaze, but she stood taller, her voice steady. "Lila, I don't need an invitation to eat in my own town. I'm here for coffee, not trouble." Lila's laugh was sharp, like glass breaking. "Your town. Please. This isn't your personal playground. Evelyn, you're embarrassing yourself and us." She gestured to Caleb, who looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. "Go home. You don't belong here tonight." The words burned, but Evelyn didn't flinch. She'd raised Caleb alone after his father died in a logging accident, scraping by on her seamstress work and late-night shifts at diners. She'd faced worse than Lila's venom. But as she met her son's eyes, pleading for her to leave, something in her cracked. Not enough to break her, but enough to make her wonder how it had come to this. "Ma, please," Caleb whispered, barely audible. "Just go." Evelyn's jaw tightened. She wanted to scream, to tell Lila she had no right to dictate who belonged. But for Caleb's sake, she turned toward the bar. That's when she saw a flicker of recognition in the bartender's eyes. A young man named Tommy who'd grown up down the road. He gave her a subtle nod, as if he knew something Lila didn't. Evelyn didn't know it yet, but that nod was the first spark of a fire that would change everything. She slid onto a bar stool, her hands trembling slightly as she ordered her coffee. The Rusty Fork wasn't just any restaurant. It was part of a small chain, Carter's Comfort, that Evelyn had quietly built from the ground up. Decades ago, she'd started with a single diner, pouring her heart into every recipe, every smile she served with it. She'd sold the chain years back, or so everyone thought, but the truth was more complicated. And Lila, who'd spent the last hour bragging about her love for Carter's Comfort's famous peach cobbler, had no idea who she was really dealing with. As Evelyn sipped her coffee, the door swung open again. A man in a crisp suit stepped in, his presence jarring against the plaid shirts and work boots of the regulars. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on Evelyn. "Mrs. Carter?" he asked, his voice cutting through the chatter. "I need a word." Lila's head snapped up, her brows furrowing. Evelyn set her mug down, her heart pounding. She didn't know this man, but something in his tone told her this wasn't just a casual visit. The air in the Rusty Fork shifted, like the moment before a storm breaks, and Evelyn felt the weight of a truth about to unravel. The man in the suit introduced himself as Daniel Hargrove, a lawyer from Nashville with a briefcase full of secrets. His polished shoes clicked against the floor as he approached Evelyn, ignoring the curious stares from the dinner crowd. Lila's eyes narrowed, her fork hovering over her plate of fried chicken. "Who's this?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to slice through the tension. Evelyn didn't answer, her gaze fixed on Daniel as he pulled a chair to her side at the bar. "Mrs. Carter," Daniel said, his voice low but clear. "I represent the board of Carter's Comfort. There's an urgent matter regarding your ownership stake." The word ownership hung in the air like smoke. Evelyn's breath caught. She hadn't spoken of her connection to Carter's Comfort in years, not since she'd stepped back from the day-to-day operations. Most folks in Willow Creek assumed she'd sold out completely, and she'd let them believe it, preferring the quiet life of a seamstress to the spotlight of a businesswoman. But the truth was, she still held a majority stake in the chain, a silent legacy she'd kept hidden even from Caleb. Lila's laugh broke the silence, high and mocking. "Ownership? Her? Oh, please. She's a nobody who can barely afford that rusty truck outside." She leaned forward, her voice dripping with condescension. "Evelyn, don't waste this man's time with your delusions." Daniel didn't flinch. He opened his briefcase, pulling out a stack of documents stamped with the Carter's Comfort logo. "Mrs. Carter owns 51% of the company," he said, his tone matter of fact. "She's the majority shareholder. Always has been." The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Caleb's fork clattered to his plate, his eyes wide as he stared at his mother. Emma and Nate looked up, confused, sensing the shift but not understanding it. Lila's face froze, her smirk fading into something unsteady. "That's impossible," she sputtered. "Carter's Comfort is a multi-state chain. She's just a seamstress." Evelyn's hands tightened around her coffee mug. She wanted to speak, to explain, but the weight of the moment held her silent. She'd never wanted to flaunt her success, not when Willow Creek valued hard work over flash. But Lila's cruelty had pushed her to a breaking point, and now the truth was spilling out like water from a cracked dam. "Mrs. Carter," Daniel continued, "the board needs your approval on a major expansion deal. We've been trying to reach you for weeks. When I heard you might be here tonight, I drove straight from Nashville." He slid a contract across the bar. "The page is heavy with legalese. Your signature could double the chain's reach by next year." Lila stood, her chair scraping loudly. "This is ridiculous. Caleb, tell them this is a mistake." Her voice cracked, betraying her panic. Caleb didn't move, his eyes locked on Evelyn, searching for answers she hadn't given him in years. "Ma," he said softly, "is this true?" Evelyn met his gaze, her heart aching. "It's true, son. I built Carter's Comfort from nothing. Started with a diner on Route 12, pouring every dime I had into it. When it grew, I kept my name off the signs. Didn't want the fuss. But I never sold my stake. It's still mine." The room buzzed with whispers. Tommy, the bartender, leaned forward, a grin tugging at his lips. He'd known Evelyn his whole life, had eaten her cobbler as a kid when she'd bring it to his mama's house. "Knew you were something special, Miss Carter," he said, loud enough for the room to hear. Lila's face flushed red. "You're lying. You're all in on this scam." She turned to the crowd, her voice rising. "She's manipulating you. She's nobody." Enough. Evelyn's voice cut through the noise. Sharp and steady. She stood, her small frame radiating a quiet power that silenced the room. Lila, you don't get to decide who I am. You don't get to decide who belongs. This restaurant, this chain, it's mine. And you're sitting in it, eating my food, while telling me I'm not welcome. Lila opened her mouth, but no words came. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a mix of shock and admiration. Evelyn's hands shook, not with fear, but with the weight of a truth she'd buried for too long. She'd built something lasting, something that fed families and brought people together, and she wouldn't let Lila's pride tear that down. Daniel cleared his throat. Mrs. Carter, about the expansion. Not now, Evelyn said, her eyes still on Lila. I need a moment with my family. She walked toward their booth, her steps deliberate. Caleb stood, his face a mix of awe and guilt. Ma, why didn't you tell me? Evelyn's voice softened. I didn't want you to see me as anything but your ma. I wanted you to be proud of me for who I am, not what I own. Lila's eyes darted between them, her confidence crumbling. She grabbed her purse, muttering, this isn't over. But as she stormed toward the door, the weight of her words felt hollow. The truth was out, and it was sharper than any insult she could hurl. The door slammed behind Lila. The bells jingle a mocking echo. The restaurant buzzed with chatter, locals leaning over tables to dissect the bombshell. Evelyn stood by Caleb's booth, her heart pounding as she looked at her son. His face was a storm of emotions, confusion, pride, and a flicker of betrayal. Emma and Nate stared up at her, their small faces curious. Grandma, you own this place? Emma asked. Her crayon paused mid-scribble. Evelyn managed a smile. Something like that. Sweetheart. She slid into the booth, her hands still trembling from the confrontation. Caleb's silence was louder than any words, and it cut deeper than Lila's venom. Caleb, she began, her voice soft but firm. I never meant to keep this from you. It never seemed like the right time. He looked down at his hands, calloused from years of carpentry. Ma, you built a whole chain of restaurants and didn't tell me. I thought you were just, sewing dresses and baking pies for the church. I did those things too, Evelyn said, her eyes steady. They're part of who I am. But Carter's Comfort It was my dream. After your daddy died, I had to keep going. For you. I poured everything into that first diner. Every late night. Every recipe. Every dollar I scraped together. It grew bigger than I ever planned. Caleb's jaw tightened. You could have told me. I deserve to know. Evelyn nodded, the weight of his words settling in her chest. You're right. I should have. I didn't want you to think I was someone else. I'm still your ma. Caleb. Always will be. Before he could respond, the door swung open again. Lila was back, her face a mask of defiance, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. She marched to the booth, her heels clicking like a metronome. This isn't over. Evelyn, she said, her voice lower now, almost a hiss. You think you can humiliate me in front of everyone? I'll make sure people know who you really are. Evelyn stood, meeting Lila's gaze. And who's that? Lila. A woman who worked her hands raw to build something real. Or someone you decided doesn't belong because I don't fit your idea of important. The crowd watched. Forks paused. Breaths held. Lila's lips parted. But no words came. For the first time, she seemed to realize the room wasn't on her side. Tommy, wiping down the bar, called out, Ms. Carter's more Willow Creek than you'll ever be. Ma'am. A few locals chuckled, nodding in agreement. Lila's face flushed, but she pressed on. You think you're untouchable because of some old contract. I'll talk to my lawyer. Enough. Lila. Caleb's voice was quiet but firm, cutting through her tirade. He stood, his broad frame towering over the booth. You've said enough tonight. Lila blinked, stunned. Caleb, you're taking her side. I'm taking the side of what's right, he said, his voice steady. Ma's done nothing but love us. And you've treated her like dirt. I'm done letting you call the shots. The restaurant erupted in soft murmurs, a tide of support swelling for Evelyn. Lila's eyes darted around, searching for an ally, but found none. She grabbed her purse and stormed out again, this time without a word. The door's slam felt final, but Evelyn knew better. Lila wasn't one to back down easily. Daniel, still standing by the bar, cleared his throat. Mrs. Carter, I hate to interrupt, but the board's waiting on your decision. The expansion deal. Evelyn held up a hand. I'll look at it tomorrow. Daniel, tonight. I'm with my family. She sat back down, pulling Emma close. The little girl giggled, wrapping her arms around Evelyn's neck. Nate, quieter, leaned against her, his small hand finding hers. As the evening wore on, the restaurant returned to its usual hum. Locals stopped by the booth to offer Evelyn quiet words of support, their smiles warm with pride. Always knew you were a force, Evelyn, said Mrs. Jenkins, who ran the general store. Just didn't know how big. Evelyn thanked them, her heart swelling, but her eyes kept drifting to the door, wondering what Lila would do next. She'd humiliated her daughter-in-law in front of the town, not by choice, but by necessity. Lila's pride was wounded, and Evelyn knew a wounded ego could be dangerous. As the night wound down, Caleb leaned forward, his voice low. Ma, I'm sorry. I should have stood up for you sooner. I didn't know how to handle Lila. Evelyn squeezed his hand. You're standing up now? Son, that's what matters. But as they left the Rusty Fork, the stars bright above the Tennessee fields, Evelyn felt a chill. Lila's silence wouldn't last. Something bigger was coming, and Evelyn would need every ounce of her strength to face it. The next morning, Evelyn woke to the smell of coffee and the soft creak of her farmhouse's wooden floors. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, catching the dust motes in a lazy dance. She poured herself a mug, her mind replaying the previous night's chaos. Lila's humiliation, Caleb's stand, the lawyer's bombshell, it all felt like a fever dream. But the stack of documents Daniel had left on her counter was real, their weight a reminder of the empire she'd built and the storm she'd stirred. She sat at her worn oak table, flipping through the contract. The expansion deal would take Carter's comfort to new states, new communities. It promised jobs, growth, and a legacy that would outlive her. But it also meant stepping back into a world she'd left behind, a world of boardrooms and power plays, far from the simplicity of Willow Creek. Evelyn wasn't sure she was ready for that. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Caleb, his face etched with worry. Ma, we need to talk, he said, stepping inside. Lila's gone. Gone. Evelyn's heart skipped. What do you mean? Gone. She left this morning. Took the kids to her sister's in Knoxville. Said she needed space to figure things out. Caleb's voice was heavy with guilt. I tried to stop her, but she's furious. Says you ruined her life. Evelyn's chest tightened. She'd expected Lila to fight back, but taking Emma and Nate felt like a low blow. She'll come back. Caleb. She's angry, but she loves those kids. She won't keep them from you. Caleb ran a hand through his hair, his eyes distant. I don't know, Ma. She's been talking to her lawyer friend, some guy named Greg. Says she's going to dig into your business. Find a way to prove you're lying about owning the chain. Evelyn's jaw clenched. Lila's pride was one thing, but dragging her grandchildren into this feud was another. Let her try, she said, her voice steady. The truth doesn't bend, no matter how hard she pushes. But doubt gnawed at her. Lila was resourceful, and her city connections gave her an edge Evelyn lacked. If she was digging, she might uncover something maybe not about the ownership, but about Evelyn's past. There were things Evelyn had buried deep, choices she'd made to protect Caleb and build her empire, choices that could be twisted to look ugly in the wrong hands. By noon, the town was buzzing with gossip. Evelyn drove to the Rusty Fork to meet Daniel, her truck rattling over the dirt roads. The restaurant was quieter today, but the air still hummed with last night's drama. Tommy greeted her with a grin. Heard Lila's stirring up trouble. You need backup, Miss Carter. Evelyn chuckled, though it felt forced. I can handle her, Tommy. But keep an eye out, will you? Daniel was waiting at a corner table, his briefcase open. Mrs. Carter, we need your decision by tomorrow. The investors are getting antsy. He pushed the contract toward her, his eyes kind but firm. This could change everything for Carter's comfort. Evelyn nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She signed the preliminary agreement, buying herself time, and left the restaurant with a heavy heart. As she stepped into the parking lot, her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. You think you've won, but I'm just getting started. Enjoy your little empire while it lasts. The message wasn't signed, but Evelyn knew it was Lila. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't just about Pride Anna Maria, it was personal. Lila was out for blood, and Evelyn had to protect what she'd built. Not just for herself, but for Caleb, Emma, Nate, and the town that had stood by her. She drove to the old diner on Route 12, the one where Carter's comfort had begun. It was shuttered now, a relic of her past, but stepping inside felt like coming home. The faded sign still hung above the counter, the booths worn but sturdy. She sat in one, tracing the initials she'd carved there decades ago. This was where she'd dreamed big, where she'd turned grief into grit. Lila could try to tear her down, but Evelyn wasn't going anywhere. That evening, Caleb called. Ma, Lila's been posting online. Says you're a fraud, that you stole the chain from someone else. People are starting to talk. Evelyn's heart sank. She wasn't on social media, but she knew its power. Lila was weaponizing lies, banking on the court of public opinion to ruin her. Evelyn needed to act, not just to save her name, but to show Caleb and herself that she was stronger than this. She called Daniel. I'm signing the expansion deal, she said, but I want a press conference. Here, in Willow Creek. It's time people knew the truth. The press conference was set for Saturday at the Rusty Fork, and by Friday, Willow Creek was alive with anticipation. Word had spread like wildfire. Evelyn Carter, the quiet seamstress, was the mastermind behind Carter's comfort. Locals who'd known her for years were stunned, their pride tinged with awe. But Lila's online campaign was gaining traction too. Her posts, dripping with venom, painted Evelyn as a schemer who'd conned her way into wealth. Screenshots of her accusations were shared across social media, some calling Evelyn a rural con artist. The lies stung, but Evelyn refused to let them define her. She spent Friday preparing, digging through old records in her attic ledgers, contracts, even recipes scribbled on napkins. Each was a piece of her journey, proof of the sweat and sacrifice that had built Carter's comfort. She found a photo of herself at 25, standing in front of the Route 12 diner, her smile fierce despite the grief in her eyes. That was the Evelyn she needed to channel now. Caleb came by that evening, his face drawn. Ma, I saw Lila's posts. She's saying you forged documents, that you cheated someone out of the business. People are starting to believe her. Evelyn's hands stilled on the photo. Let them talk. Caleb, the truth doesn't need their approval. But what if she finds something? He pressed. What if there's something in your past that... There's nothing, Evelyn said, her voice firm but kind. I built this with my own hands. No shortcuts. No lies. Lila can dig all she wants, she'll find nothing but dirt. Caleb nodded, but his eyes were troubled. She's coming back tomorrow. Says she's got proof you're not who you say you are. She's bringing Greg, that lawyer friend. Evelyn's stomach twisted. She didn't know what Lila had, but she knew desperation made people dangerous. Then let her come, she said. I'm ready. Saturday morning dawned crisp and clear, the Tennessee fields glowing under a pale blue sky. The Rusty Fork was packed, not just with locals, but with reporters from Nashville and beyond, drawn by the drama of a small-town showdown. A podium stood at the center of the dining room, flanked by Carter's comfort banners. Evelyn wore her best dress, A simple Navy number she'd sewn herself. Her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked every inch the matriarch. But her heart raced like a girl's. Daniel opened the conference, outlining the expansion deal and Evelyn's role as majority shareholder. The crowd murmured, cameras flashing. Then Evelyn stepped to the podium, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "I'm Evelyn Carter," she began. "Most of you know me as the lady who fixes your hems or brings pies to church. But I'm also the woman who built Carter's Comfort, starting with a dream and a diner on Route 12. She told her story of the late nights, the recipes perfected over years, the loans she'd scraped together after her husband's death. She spoke of Willow Creek, of the community that had kept her going. The crowd listened, rapt, as she held up the old photo, her younger self staring out with defiance. "This is who I am," she said. "Not a con artist, not a fraud, just a woman who worked hard and loved harder." The applause was thunderous, but it was cut short by a commotion at the door. Lila stormed in, Greg at her side, a folder clutched in her hand. "Stop this," she shouted, her voice shrill. "She's lying to you all." The room fell silent, all eyes on Lila. Greg, a wiry man with a smug grin, stepped forward. "We have evidence that Evelyn Carter misrepresented her ownership, documents that suggest she manipulated the original investors." Evelyn's heart pounded, but she didn't flinch. "Show me," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "Let's see this evidence." Greg hesitated, then handed her the folder. Evelyn opened it, her eyes scanning the pages. They were copies of early contracts, marked with highlighter, but nothing damning. She recognized every signature, every clause. She'd been meticulous, even in her youth. "This is nothing," she said, holding up the folder. "Just old paperwork. No proof of anything." Lila's face reddened. "You're lying. You stole this company." The crowd murmured, some shouting support for Evelyn, others whispering doubt. Daniel stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise. "I've reviewed every document related to Carter's Comfort. Mrs. Carter's ownership is ironclad. If you have real evidence, present it to a court." Lila's eyes darted to Greg, who looked suddenly unsure. The room felt like a powder keg, ready to explode. Evelyn knew this was her moment not just to defend herself, but to end this feud before it tore her family apart. The air in the Rusty Fork was thick with tension. Every eye locked on Evelyn as she stood at the podium, the folder of so-called evidence in her hand. Lila's accusations hung like a storm cloud, but Evelyn felt a clarity she hadn't in years. This wasn't just about her name, it was about her family, her town, and the legacy she'd built from nothing. "Lila," Evelyn said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "I don't know what you think you found, but this," she held up the folder, "is just paper. It doesn't change the truth. I built Carter's Comfort with my own hands, my own heart. You can't rewrite that, no matter how hard you try." Lila's face twisted, her hands clenched into fists. "You're a liar," she spat. "You've been playing this poor, humble widow act for years. But I see through you. You're greedy, hoarding this company while pretending to be one of us." The crowd gasped, but Evelyn didn't waver. She stepped closer to Lila, her eyes locking onto hers. "Greedy. I gave everything to this town. Every job at this restaurant. Every meal served. Every family fed. That's my greed. What's yours, Lila? What do you gain by tearing me down?" Lila faltered, her bravado cracking. Greg shifted uncomfortably, his confidence fading under the weight of the room's scrutiny. Caleb, who'd been standing silently by the booth, stepped forward. "Lila, stop," he said, his voice low but firm. "You're wrong about Ma. You've been wrong this whole time." The words hit Lila like a physical blow. She turned to him, her eyes wide with betrayal. "Caleb, you're my husband. You're supposed to be on my side." "I am," Caleb said, his voice breaking. "But not when you're hurting the people I love. Ma's done nothing but support us. And you've treated her like an enemy. I can't keep pretending that's okay. The room was silent, the weight of Caleb's words settling over everyone. Emma and Nate, who'd been watching from the booth, ran to Evelyn, wrapping their arms around her. "We love you, Grandma," Emma whispered, her voice small but fierce. Evelyn's eyes stung with tears, but she held them back, her heart swelling with love for her grandchildren. Lila's face crumpled, her anger giving way to something raw or shame. Maybe. Or fear. She turned to Greg, her voice trembling. Tell them what we found." Greg cleared his throat, but his voice lacked conviction. We believe there may be discrepancies in the original funding for Carter's comfort. It's not conclusive. But enough, Evelyn interrupted, her voice ringing with authority. She turned to the crowd, her hands steady now. "I started this company with a $500 loan from the bank and a recipe for peach cobbler. I worked nights, raised my son, and kept going when the world told me to quit. If anyone thinks I stole something, let them prove it. I'm not afraid of the truth." The crowd erupted in applause, the sound rolling through the restaurant like thunder. Locals stood, clapping, their faces alight with pride. "Mrs. Jenkins shouted, 'That's our Evelyn.' And Tommy banged a glass on the bar, grinning. Even the reporters were scribbling furiously, captivated by the drama. Lila's shoulders slumped, her fight draining away. She looked at Caleb, then at the kids clinging to Evelyn, and something in her seemed to break. Without a word, she turned and walked out, Greg trailing behind her like a shadow. The door's jingle was barely audible over the crowd's cheers. Evelyn let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She signed the expansion deal right there, her signature bold on the page. Daniel beamed, shaking her hand. "You're a legend, Mrs. Carter." But as the crowd dispersed and the reporters packed up, Evelyn's thoughts were on Lila. She'd won this round. But at what cost? Her family was fractured, and the town, though supportive, was now a battleground of gossip. She needed to find a way to heal the rift, not just for herself, but for Caleb and the kids. That night, she sat on her porch, the Tennessee stars bright above. Caleb joined her, his hands stuffed in his pockets. "I'm sorry, Ma," he said. "I let this go too far." Evelyn reached for his hand. "We'll fix it, son. Together." But as she looked out at the fields, she knew Lila wasn't done. The fight was far from over, and Evelyn would need to dig deep to protect what mattered most. The days after the press conference were a blur. Willow Creek buzzed with Evelyn's story, her name on every tongue. The local paper ran a front-page feature, "Seamstress to Restaurateur, the unlikely empire of Evelyn Carter." Customers flocked to the Rusty Fork, some to eat, others to catch a glimpse of the woman who'd built a legacy under their noses. Evelyn handled it with her usual grace, serving coffee and smiles. But inside, she was bracing for Lila's next move. Lila had been silent since the conference, still holed up in Knoxville with Emma and Nate. Caleb was a wreck, calling daily to check on the kids. But Lila's responses were curt, evasive. Evelyn knew she was planning something Lila's pride wouldn't let her quit. Sure enough, a week later, a letter arrived from Greg's law firm, demanding an audit of Carter's Comfort's financial records. It cited potential irregularities in the company's founding, echoing Lila's online claims. The letter was a shot across the bow, a warning that Lila was digging deeper. Evelyn met with Daniel at her farmhouse. The contract spread across her kitchen table. "They're fishing," Daniel said, his brow furrowed. "There's nothing to find, but an audit could tie up the expansion for months. They're betting on wearing you down." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "Let them try. I've got nothing to hide." But doubt crept in. Not about her ownership that was airtight, but about the choices she'd made in the early days. She'd been young, desperate, a widow with a toddler and no safety net. She'd cut corners, not illegally, but in ways that could be spun to look shady. A loan from a questionable lender, a handshake deal with a supplier, small things that had kept her afloat. If Lila's lawyer twisted them, They could paint a damning picture. She confided in Caleb, who'd been staying at the farmhouse to escape the empty silence of his own home. "Ma, whatever you did, it was to survive," he said, his voice fierce. "You don't owe anyone an explanation." But Evelyn wasn't so sure. She wanted to protect her family, not just her name. If Lila dragged this into court, it could tear them apart. She needed to end this, not with a fight, but with something stronger. She called Lila's sister in Knoxville, leaving a message. "Tell Lila I want to talk. No lawyers. No games. Just us." Hours later, Lila called back, her voice cold but curious. "What do you want, Evelyn?" "To make this right," Evelyn said, "come to the farmhouse. Bring the kids. Let's talk." Lila agreed, reluctantly, and the next day, she arrived with Emma and Nate. The kids ran to Evelyn, their hugs a balm to her weary heart. Lila stood by her car, arms crossed, her face a mask of defiance. "Say what you need to say," she snapped. Evelyn gestured to the porch. "Sit. Please." They sat, the air heavy with unspoken words. Emma and Nate played in the yard, their laughter a stark contrast to the tension. Evelyn took a deep breath. "Lila, I don't want to fight you. I never did. But you need to understand something. This," she gestured to the farmhouse. "The fields, this is my home. Carter's comfort is my heart. I built it for Caleb, for these kids, for this town. I'm not your enemy." Lila's eyes narrowed. "You humiliated me. You let me look like a fool." "You did that yourself," Evelyn said, not unkindly. "You decided I wasn't good enough. But I'm not here to prove you wrong. I'm here to ask you to stop. For the kids. For Caleb." Lila's gaze dropped, her hands twisting in her lap. For the first time, she looked small, vulnerable. I wanted to belong here. But it's always been your town, your family. I'm an outsider." Evelyn's heart softened. She saw the pain behind Lila's anger, the insecurity that had fueled her cruelty. "You're not an outsider unless you choose to be," she said. "This town, this family, it's big enough for you. But you've got to let go of this fight." Lila was silent, her eyes on the kids. Finally, she nodded, a small, reluctant gesture. "I'll drop the audit," she said quietly. "But don't expect me to like you." Evelyn smiled faintly. "I don't. But I hope you'll try." As Lila drove away with the kids, Evelyn felt a weight lift. It wasn't peace. Not yet. But it was a start. She'd faced Lila's storm and come out stronger not by winning, but by offering a way forward. The weeks that followed were quieter, but not without their challenges. Lila returned to Willow Creek with Emma and Nate. And though she and Evelyn weren't friends, they'd reached a fragile truce. Caleb worked to rebuild his marriage, balancing his love for Lila with his loyalty to his mother. Evelyn gave them space, focusing on the expansion of Carter's comfort. The deal was finalized, and new locations were planned across Tennessee and beyond, each designed to feel like home, just as Evelyn had always intended. But the real work was in healing her family. Evelyn invited Lila to the farmhouse for Sunday dinners, not forcing closeness, but offering it. Lila came, hesitant at first, her city polish stark against the worn tablecloths and mason jar glasses. Emma and Nate filled the silences with their chatter, and slowly, Lila began to soften. She even helped Evelyn peel apples for a cobbler one evening, her movements awkward but earnest. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was progress. The town, too, rallied around Evelyn. The Rusty Fork became a pilgrimage site of sorts. Locals and visitors alike drawn to the story of the woman who'd built an empire from a diner. Evelyn didn't love the attention, but she used it to give back. She started a scholarship fund with Carter's Comfort profits, helping Willow Creek kids go to college. She hired more locals, trained them, gave them a stake in the business. "This isn't just my story," she told a reporter. "It's ours." One evening, as summer faded into fall, Evelyn sat on her porch with Caleb, the air cool and fragrant with hay. The stars were bright, the field stretching out like a promise kept. "Ma," Caleb said, his voice soft. "I'm proud of you. I always was. But now, I see you." Evelyn's eyes stung, but she smiled. "That's all I ever wanted. Son." Lila stepped onto the porch, a rare softness in her eyes. "The cobbler's in the oven," she said, almost shyly. "I used your recipe. Hope I didn't mess it up." Evelyn chuckled. "It's hard to mess up love, Lila. You just keep trying." As they sat together, the tension of the past months seemed to dissolve, carried away by the night breeze. Evelyn looked at her family flawed, fractured, but fighting to be whole and felt a peace she hadn't known in years. She'd built more than a restaurant chain. She'd built a legacy of resilience, of community, of love that could weather any storm. The Rusty Forks lights glowed in the distance, a beacon of home. Evelyn knew there'd be more challenges, more fights to face. But she was ready. She'd face the worst and come out stronger, not by tearing others down, but by lifting them up. And that, she realized, was the true heart of Carter's comfort.